The lakeside mansion held more than just luxury. It held ancient silences, scars time couldn't erase, and a man who had learned to live without feeling. Caio Venturini had everything money could buy, except the one thing he truly needed: someone who could see him beyond the fortune, beyond the last name, beyond the mask he wore every day. Luana didn't know this when she accepted the temporary job. She just wanted to survive, to pay her sick mother's bills, to escape the marks of an abusive past that still weighed on her skin. She hadn't imagined that, by falling into that dark water, she would be rescued by a man who had been drowning in his own pain for years. She hadn't imagined that, by feeling his arms around her trembling body, something inside her would awaken. Something she thought was dead, because some encounters aren't by chance, some dives save 2 lives at once, and some loves are born precisely when no one is looking for them. This is the story of 2 wounded hearts that found each other at the edge of an abyss and had to choose between fear and the courage to feel again. Subscribe to the channel for more heartwarming stories. The sky was heavy that morning, with dense clouds that seemed to press down on the lake's surface. Luana scrubbed the mansion's patio with mechanical movements, trying not to think about how small her life had become. Small and heavy at the same time: her mother's medical bills, the overdue rent, the constant feeling of sinking, all of it accompanied her like a cold shadow. She didn't notice the patio was slicker than usual. She didn't see the patch of moss hidden under the previous night's rain. She only felt the ground disappear from under her feet. A scream caught in her throat, the icy shock of the water swallowing her whole, as if it wanted to carry her away from everything. The natural pool was an extension of the lake, an old, poorly planned addition that allowed fish to swim in freely. Luana thrashed, feeling something brush against her leg. Panic. The water was murky, dark, and she couldn't tell where it was deep and where there was air. That's when she felt hands, firm, desperate, pulling her up with a strength that seemed more than human. Caio lifted her from the water as if he were fighting something bigger than the lake, as if he were yanking someone from the clutches of a past he could never forget. He held her so tightly, Luana felt his ribs against hers, his breath catching, his heart pounding erratically. "Breathe," he commanded, his voice rough, almost angry. "For God's sake, breathe." Luana coughed, spitting out water, her hands gripping his shoulders, as if he were the only solid thing in a world spinning too fast. When she could finally focus, she saw his face, wet, strained, with an expression that mixed relief and terror. "Are you okay?" he asked, but didn't wait for an answer. He simply swept her up into his arms and walked towards the house, ignoring the water streaming from both of them. Ignoring the cold wind that cut at their skin. Luana couldn't speak. She could only look at him, at this man she barely knew, and feel something strange and unsettling. For the first time in years, someone had held her as if she mattered. Before we continue, tell us where you're watching from and subscribe for more moving stories every day. Inside the mansion, Caio deposited her on the living room sofa, wrapping her in a thick blanket as he barked orders at the housekeeper to bring towels, hot tea, anything. He knelt before her, still breathless, his hands trembling slightly as he checked her for injuries. "You could have died," he said, and there was an accusation in his words, as if she had committed a crime by falling. I didn't see," Luana began, but her voice faltered. "It doesn't matter." Caio looked away, running a hand through his wet hair. "This lake is a curse." She didn't understand what he meant, but she caught the pain in his words. There was something else there, something he wasn't saying, something that turned the rescue into something more than just an act of courage. In the following days, Luana developed a fever. The shock, the cold, the trauma, everything conspired to keep her in bed in the guest room Caio insisted she occupy. He himself brought her meals, checked her temperature, sat in the armchair by her bed when he thought she was asleep. But Luana wasn't sleeping. She pretended because she didn't know how to handle this strange presence. This man who oscillated between coldness and a disconcerting tenderness. One night, delirious with fever, she mumbled something unintelligible. Kaio moved closer, placing a hand on her forehead, and Luana opened her eyes. Meeting his gaze so closely she could see the hidden scars there, the marks of someone who had also drowned in a different way in waters no one could see. "Why did you save me?" she whispered. Kaio froze. The question hit him like a punch. "Because I couldn't not save you," he replied, his voice low, almost confessional. And in that moment, something silent and inevitable began to form between them. Something neither of them asked for, but that both already felt growing like a tide, impossible to contain. When Luana finally recovered, she returned to work. But everything had changed. His eyes followed her down the hallways. Their conversations, once non-existent, now happened in tense fragments, charged with unspoken things. And the t-shirt he had left to warm her that first night remained, tucked away in her suitcase, carrying his scent, a reminder that something between them had begun the moment he pulled her from that dark water. But what neither of them knew yet was that the rescue came with a price, and that soon the truth would surface like a violent wave, threatening to drag them both back into the abyss. Kaio Venturini hadn't slept well in years. Insomnia was an old, faithful companion, like a shadow. Every night when the world fell silent, the memories returned, his younger brother's laugh echoing through the house, the sound of the dive, the muffled cry, the water that returned nothing but silence. He was 15 when David died, 16 when he swore never to go near that lake again, 20 when he inherited everything and realized that fortune was just another form of loneliness. Now, at 32, Kaio had built walls so high around himself that he no longer knew how to tear them down. The mansion was his refuge and his prison, a place where he didn't have to pretend, didn't have to smile for investors, didn't have to play the part of the successful magnate. Here, he could finally be who he truly was, a man tired of carrying burdens he couldn't let go of. But since Luana fell into that water, something had shifted, something small, almost imperceptible, but real. For the first time in years, Kaio found himself wanting someone to stay. Luana, in turn, carried her own scars. She had spent 3 years with a man who twisted love into control, affection into manipulation, and promises into traps. When she finally broke free, she was shattered, not physically but in a deeper, harder to heal way. She learned not to trust, not to expect, not to feel. Coming to this sprawling estate was just another temporary gig, another way to survive while taking care of her mother, while piecing back together a life she barely recognized as her own. Luana hadn't expected anything from this place beyond a paycheck at the end of the month. But then he saved her, and something about that gesture, that urgency, the way he held her, as if she were precious, as if losing her would be unbearable, cracked through her armor. She tried to ignore it, tried to keep her distance, but it was hard when he'd appear in the kitchen at 6 in the morning, making coffee in silence, or when he'd stand on the porch staring out at the lake with a heart-wrenching expression. It was hard when he'd ask, with unexpected gentleness, if she'd eaten, if she was feeling better, if she needed anything. One afternoon, while Luana was tidying the library, she found an old photograph slipped between the books. 2 boys smiling, arms around each other, with the lake in the background. One was clearly Kaio, younger, lighter, with a sparkle in his eyes she'd never seen in the man she knew now. "That's my brother." Kaio's voice came from behind her, low, controlled. Luana turned, holding the picture carefully as if it was sacred. "He looks like you," she said softly. "He was better than me." Kaio replied, his eyes fixed on the image. "Braver, freer." What happened to him? Silence. A silence so heavy, Luana almost apologized for asking, but then Kaio spoke, the words tumbling out like a confession. He drowned. In the lake. I was there. I couldn't save him. Luana's chest tightened. Suddenly, everything made sense. The desperation with which he'd pulled her from the water, the anger, the fear, the way he avoided looking at the lake. "It wasn't your fault," she said, and she didn't know where that certainty came from, but she knew she had to say it. Kaio finally met her gaze, and there was something raw in his eyes, something exposed. "You don't know that. I know no one can save everyone, not even you." The words hung in the air, and for a brief moment, Kaio seemed disarmed, vulnerable, human. "Thank you," he murmured, almost inaudibly, before leaving the library. Luana stood there, holding the photograph, feeling as if she'd crossed an invisible line. She didn't know exactly what it was, but she knew that from this moment on, he was no longer just the distant boss, and she was no longer just the temporary employee. They were two wounded people trying not to hurt each other again, but slowly discovering that maybe the only way to heal was to let someone in. Reality, however, wasn't made up of suspended moments and gazes that lingered too long. There was a world outside, and that world began to press in, to demand, to remind them that everyone had a place, and those places didn't touch. Beatrice, the housekeeper who'd been with the estate for 15 years, was the first to notice. She saw the way Kaio lingered in the kitchen when Luana was there, how he'd invent excuses to pass by where she was working, how his eyes would search for her even when he pretended to be focused on something else. "Be careful, dear," Beatrice said one day as they prepared lunch. "His world and yours, they're very different." Luana pretended not to understand, but the message was clear. There was an unbridgeable social divide between them, a chasm that all his money couldn't buy and all her courage couldn't cross without consequence. And there was more. Helena Venturini, Caio's aunt and his only close relative left, arrived at the estate unannounced on a rainy afternoon. She was elegant, cold, with a gaze that assessed everything and everyone as if calculating the value of each piece. "I heard you had a little accident," she said to Kaio while sipping tea in the living room, "and that an employee nearly drowned." "She's fine," Kaio replied curtly. "Good, I hope you're not getting too attached to temporary people." The word landed like a blade. Temporary. That's what Luana was, after all. A 3-month job, a brief stopover, someone who would soon be forgotten. But when Helena left and Kaio came up to the guest room where Luana was folding linens, there was something different in his face, something that looked like defiance. "Don't pay attention to what she said," he said, leaning against the doorframe. "I don't even know what she said," Luana lied, folding a sheet with more force than necessary. "Liar," Kaio almost smiled. It was the first time she'd seen anything close to a smile on him, and the effect was devastating. Luana felt her face flush, her heart race, and she hated herself for it. "I know my place," she said, trying to sound firm. "And what is that?" The question caught her off guard. "I'm the employee. You're the boss. It's simple." Kaio took 2 steps into the room, and suddenly the space felt smaller, the air denser. "And what if I don't want it to be simple?" he asked, his voice low, dangerous. Luana stopped folding the sheet. She looked at him, at this man who had saved her, who had taken her in, who was now looking at her as if she were the only real thing in a world of pretense. "It doesn't matter what you want, Kaio. It matters what's possible. Since when did you stop believing in the impossible?" The words hit her hard, because it was true. At some point, Luana had stopped believing, stopped dreaming, stopped wanting. But here he was, standing in front of her, challenging her to feel again. "You don't know me," she whispered. "Then let me get to know you." The silence that followed was charged with everything neither of them dared to say. And when Kaio finally left the room, Luana realized she was trembling, not from fear, but from something far more dangerous. Hope. Because for the first time, someone wasn't asking her to be less. They were asking her to be more. And that was simultaneously the most terrifying and the most irresistible thing she had ever felt. But out there, beyond the estate walls, forces were at play. Word of Kaio's real estate development project was spreading through town, an endeavor that would displace entire families, including people Luana knew. And when the truth reached her, everything being built between them would be put to the test, because love doesn't happen in a vacuum, and the people we love aren't always who we thought they were. A palpable tension hung in the air, something even silence couldn't hide. Luana felt it in the glances exchanged in the hallways, in conversations that started and died before they went anywhere, in the way the space between them seemed both vast and non-existent. Kaio wrestled with himself. He knew he should keep his distance, that there were unspoken rules, that he had no right to want what he was wanting. But the heart doesn't obey logic, and his was determined to betray him. One night, long after everyone else had left, Luana stayed late to finish cleaning the dining room. When she looked up, she found Kaio standing in the doorway, watching her with an intensity that stole her breath. "You don't have to stay so late," he said. "I know, but I want to finish." "Why?" Luana hesitated. The truth was both simple and complicated. She stayed because, in this mansion, in this space that wasn't hers, she felt less lost. And because, somehow, being near him made the world feel less hostile. "I don't know," she lied. Kaio stepped into the room, each stride feeling like an advance into forbidden territory. "You lie a lot," he observed, almost amused. "And you say little." "Maybe because I don't know what to say." He stopped a few feet away, and Luana felt her pulse quicken. There was something different about him tonight, a vulnerability, an openness she'd never seen before. "Kaio," she began, but didn't know how to finish. "I can't stop thinking about you," he said suddenly, the words tumbling out quickly, as if they'd been held back for too long. "Ever since that day at the lake, ever since I held you and felt like I'd saved more than just a life. I'd saved something in myself too." Luana froze. No one had ever spoken to her like that, with such brutal honesty, such frightening surrender. "You can't say those things," she whispered, but there was no strength in her voice. "Why not?" "Because I don't know what to do with them." Kaio took another step, and now he was so close she could feel his warmth, the scent of wood and something indefinable that was uniquely him. "Then don't do anything. Just feel." And before Luana could think, before she could protect herself, he lifted his hand and touched her face. A light, almost reverent touch, as if she was something precious and fragile. She should have pulled away. She should have said no, but instead, she closed her eyes and allowed that touch to wash over her, allowed herself for a fleeting moment to just be a woman being touched by a man who saw her. When she opened her eyes, she met his, so close she could see the cracks, the doubts, the fear. "I can't offer you anything," he said, his voice rough. "My life is complicated, my family's a mess, I'm a mess." "I haven't asked for anything," Luana replied, and it was true. "But you deserve everything." The words broke something inside her, because no one had ever said that. No one had ever made her feel like she deserved anything more than just to survive. The kiss almost happened. Their lips were millimeters apart, their breaths mingling, the entire world reduced to that impossible space between them. But then Kaio's phone rang, loud and abrupt, shattering the spell like broken glass. He pulled back, running a hand over his face, and as he answered, Luana saw the shift, the vulnerable man disappearing, the mask snapping back into place. "Yes, I understand. Tomorrow morning." He hung up and looked at her, and there was something grim in his expression. "I have to go into the city. I'll be gone a few days." Luana just nodded, unable to speak. When he left, she stood there, alone in the silent room, her heart still pounding a frantic rhythm, her lips still tingling with the kiss that never was. And it was then she understood. The feeling was no longer something she could ignore. It was no longer small, controllable, safe. She was falling for him. And that, she knew, was the most dangerous thing that could have happened. Kaio was gone for 5 days, and each day felt like an eternity. He tried to focus on meetings, on contracts, on the numbers that danced on spreadsheets, but it all felt hollow. His mind kept returning to her face, to the almost kiss, to the feeling that he'd left something important behind. When he finally returned, it was late at night. The mansion was quiet, only one light on in the kitchen. He walked in and found her there, nursing a cup of tea, her eyes red as if she'd been crying. "Luana?" He approached, concerned. "What happened?" She looked up, and there was something different in her gaze, something hard. "I read about the project," she said, her voice controlled. "Your company's real estate development. The families who are going to be displaced." Kaio felt his stomach plummet. "Luana?" "My cousin lives in one of those houses," she continued, and now her voice trembled. "She has 3 kids, nowhere to go, and you're taking everything from her." "It's not that simple," he tried to explain. "There are compensations, relocations. We follow all the laws." Laws. Luana stood up, and there was fire in her eyes. "You think laws are the same as justice? You think money makes up for ripping someone away from the only home they know?" "I can't control everything the company does," Kaio said, but the words sounded weak even to him. "But you can choose not to do it. You can choose." She was right, and he knew it. But it was more complicated than she imagined. There were investors, signed contracts, a board pressuring him, an aunt who controlled half the shares and would never let him back out of the project. "You don't understand," he said, frustrated. "Then explain it to me. Tell me I'm wrong. Tell me you're not just another rich guy who doesn't care who he crushes along the way." The silence that followed was brutal. "I can't," he finally admitted, and saw something shatter in her eyes. "Then we have nothing to talk about." Luana walked out of the kitchen, and Kaio stood there, alone, feeling as though he'd lost something he hadn't even known he had until that moment. In the following days, she avoided all contact. She worked in silence, kept her eyes down, moved away whenever he approached. It was as if a wall had been erected between them, and Kaio didn't know how to tear it down. He tried to talk, tried to explain, but Luana was a fortress. And perhaps, he thought, it was better that way. Maybe she was right to pull away. Maybe he really was just another man, too powerful to do what was right. But the ache was real. The pain of seeing her and not being able to touch her, of knowing she was there but completely out of reach, of understanding that he'd missed out on something that could have been extraordinary. One night he saw her on the porch, staring out at the lake, her shoulders tight. He approached slowly, afraid she'd bolt. "I'm sorry," he said. "For what? For doing what you think you have to do? Or for me finding out who you really are?" The words stung more than any punch. "I'm not a monster, Luana. No, you're worse. You're someone who could be good but chooses not to be." She walked back into the house, leaving him alone with the accusation and the hollowness growing in his chest. And it was that night, lying in his massive, cold bed, that Kaio understood. He could have all the money in the world, but it meant nothing if he lost the one person who made him want to be better. The question was whether there was still time to choose again. The silent rift between them cast a heavy atmosphere over the estate. Beatrice watched it all with concern, but said nothing. She'd known Kaio long enough to see he was hurting, and that for the first time, he wasn't running from the pain, but trying to understand it. Luana, for her part, held firm to her decision, but that firmness came at a cost. Every night, alone in the guest room, she'd look at his t-shirt she still kept, wondering if she was doing the right thing or just protecting herself from something that could have transformed her. It was Helena who forced the truth to the surface. She arrived back at the estate one afternoon unannounced, a briefcase and a sharp smile in tow. "We need to talk, Kaio," she announced, settling onto the sofa as if she owned the place. Kaio descended the stairs, his expression weary. "What do you want, Helena?" "What I always want, to protect the family legacy." She opened the briefcase. "The project is under scrutiny. There's community pushback, media pressure. We need to accelerate development or pull the plug. And you know pulling the plug isn't an option." "Maybe it should be." Helena raised an eyebrow, surprised. "Since when did you develop a social conscience?" "Since I stopped to think about the consequences of my choices." "Consequences?" Helena laughed, a cold sound. "Are you talking about the people being relocated with more than fair compensation? Or are you talking about the temp employee who's been distracting you?" Kaio stiffened. "Leave her out of this." "Impossible. She's right in the middle of it." Helena leaned forward. "You know I ran background checks on all temporary hires. She has a cousin in the affected area. You think that's a coincidence?" The insinuation hit Kaio like a shot. "What are you suggesting? That maybe she took this job precisely to get close to you, to influence your decisions?" "That's ridiculous," Kaio said, but a seed of doubt had been planted. It was at that moment that Luana appeared in the doorway, carrying a tray with coffee. She'd heard everything. The look she shot Helena was one of pure contempt. The look she shot Kaio was something far worse: disappointment. "I don't need to hear this," Luana said, setting the tray down on the table with more force than necessary. "But since you're discussing my life, I'll make one thing clear. I didn't know he owned the company when I took this job. I didn't know about the project, and if I had, I probably wouldn't have come." "Luana," Kaio began, but she cut him off. "But you're right about one thing." Luana looked directly at Helena. "I care about the people who will be harmed. And yes, that includes my family. So if that's a problem for you, you can fire me now." "No," Kaio stood up. "No one is firing you." "Why?" Luana challenged him. "Because you need to prove to yourself you're not as bad as you seem. Because you want to feel better." The words were harsh, but her voice trembled, and Kaio saw then, for the first time, the tears she was trying to hold back. "Because I care about you," he said, his voice low but firm, "and because you're right. About everything." Helena stood indignant. "You're throwing away the company's future for doing the right thing," Kaio interrupted her. "I'll talk to the board. We'll revise the project, find alternatives, and if they don't agree, I'm out." "You can't do that." "I can, and I will." Helena stormed out, slamming the door, and the silence that remained was heavy. Luana was still there, looking at him with a mixture of surprise and something that might have been hope. "Were you serious?" she asked. "Every word." "Why?" Kaio took a step toward her, and this time there was no fear in his eyes. "Because you made me see that having power means nothing if I don't use it for something that matters. And because—" He hesitated, then said, "Because the only thing that really matters now is not losing you." Luana felt the tears finally fall. They weren't tears of sadness, but of relief, of something unraveling inside her. "I don't want you to do this for me," she said. "It's not for you, it's for me, for who I want to be." He moved closer. "But it would be a lie to say you have nothing to do with it. You showed me there's a different way to live, and I want to try." For the first time in weeks, Luana didn't pull away. She stood there, allowing him to approach, allowing the distance between them to finally shrink. "I'm scared," she confessed. "Me too." And if it doesn't work out? And if it does? The question hung in the air, charged with possibility, with risk, with all that still needed to be said and felt. And there, in the middle of the room where everything had crumbled, something new began to grow. Something fragile but real. Something that, this time, wouldn't be ignored. The following weeks were a whirlwind. Kaio faced the board, presented alternatives for the project, negotiated with investors. It wasn't easy. He lost allies, encountered resistance, had to make difficult choices. But for the first time, he felt like he was building something worthwhile, not just a financial empire, but a life he could look in the mirror and respect. And through it all, Luana was there. Not as an employee, but as someone who believed in him, who challenged him, who kept him honest. They didn't rush. They didn't force anything. They let the feeling grow naturally, in long conversations at night, in comfortable silences, in glances that said more than words ever could. Until one especially quiet evening, Kaio found her on the porch, gazing at the lake, the same lake that once represented his greatest pain. "Are you still afraid of it?" Luana asked, sensing his presence beside her. "Less than before," he admitted. "You helped me see that it's not the lake haunting me. It's the choices I didn't make, the things I didn't say." Luana turned to him, and the moonlight illuminated her face in a way that stole Kaio's breath. "And what do you want to say now?" He took a deep breath. He wasn't good with words, never had been, but she deserved more than silence. "I love you," he said, just like that, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "I didn't plan it, I didn't expect it, but it's true. I love you for who you are, for what you've made me realize, for the way you challenge me to be better." Luana felt her heart explode. For so long, she had convinced herself she didn't deserve to be loved, that she wasn't capable of loving again. But there, in that moment, she understood that love wasn't something you controlled. It was something that happened, against all logic, against all fear. "I love you too," she whispered, and the words freed her in a way she hadn't known was possible. Kaio pulled her close, and this time there were no interruptions, no fear, nothing but the two of them. The kiss was slow, deep, charged with all the unsaid things, all the healed pains, all the silent promises. It was a kiss that said, "I choose you, I choose this, I choose us." When they broke apart, Luana was smiling, a genuine, luminous smile that Kaio swore to keep in his memory forever. "And now?" she asked. "Now we live," he replied, "without fear, without hiding, together." She leaned against him, and they stood there side by side, looking at the lake that no longer seemed like a threat, but just a part of the story that brought them there. In the following months, the project was reshaped. Families were heard, alternatives were found. It wasn't perfect, but it was fair. And Kaio discovered that by letting go of a little power, he gained something far more valuable: peace. Luana transitioned from employee to partner. Not just in a romantic sense, but in social projects they began to develop together, using his resources to make a real difference in the community. And through it all, they grew. Not as two halves completing each other, but as two whole people who chose to walk together. There were challenges, of course. There were difficult moments, but there were also laughs, discoveries, lazy mornings, and nights when the world disappeared, and only the warmth of being close to someone who truly sees you remained. And when Kaio finally managed to go back to the lake without feeling the weight of guilt, it was with Luana's hand in his, and with the certainty that some rescues save much more than a life. They save the capacity to live again. A year later, the mansion had a different energy. It was no longer a mausoleum of silences and painful memories. It was a home, with music spilling from the windows, laughter echoing through the halls, and the feeling that here, finally, life was happening. Luana woke one sunny morning to the smell of coffee coming from the kitchen. She went downstairs and found Kaio making breakfast. something he'd learned to do in the past few months. Not perfectly, but with a care that made every dish special. "Good morning," he said, smiling in that way that still made her heart skip a beat. "Good morning," she replied, walking over and stealing a kiss. It was incredible how something so simple, a morning kiss, a shared routine, could mean so much. It was proof that they had built something solid, something that weathered the bad days and grew stronger on the good ones. Later that day, they visited Luana's cousin's new place. A simple but comfortable house she'd managed to get thanks to the fair relocation program Caio had implemented. The children ran to hug Luana, and the cousin held Caio's hands with tears in her eyes. "Thank you," she said, "for not giving up on doing the right thing." Caio just nodded, but Luana saw the emotion in his eyes. He was still learning to accept gratitude, to accept that his actions had an impact, that he could be a force for good. That night, they returned to the mansion and sat on the porch. As they had so many times, the lake reflected the stars, calm and beautiful. "Do you regret anything?" Luana asked, her head resting on his shoulder. "Not meeting you sooner," Caio answered sincerely. "But maybe we needed to go through everything we did to get here." "I think so." She looked up at him, and there was something she needed to say. "I never thought it was possible to feel this way, safe, loved, free. After everything, I thought I had lost the ability to trust." "And do you trust now? In you? Completely?" She smiled. "In myself? I'm still learning, but I'm getting there." Caio kissed her forehead, a tender gesture that said more than any elaborate declaration. "We'll get there together," he promised. And it was true. The path wouldn't be perfect. There would be stumbles, doubts, moments when life tested what they had built. But they had learned the most important thing. Love isn't the absence of problems, but the choice to face them side by side. That night, before sleeping, Luana looked at his t-shirt she still kept in the drawer, no longer as a reminder of a fragile moment, but as a symbol of where it all began, of the plunge that changed two lives, of the courage to let herself be saved, and of the strength to, together, rebuild themselves. She smiled, put the t-shirt back, and went to the bedroom where Caio awaited her. And there, in his arms with the soft sound of the lake in the background, Luana knew she was home. Not in the place, but in the person. And that was everything. And so it was that two wounded hearts discovered that love, when it's true, always finds a way. And you, what did you think of this story? What was the moment that touched your heart the most? Leave your comments below and take the opportunity to subscribe to the channel. That way you never miss our love stories.